On the morning of October 27, 1962, a U.S. Navy destroyer sliced through the gray waters of the Atlantic, its crew sweating despite the autumn chill. The men leaned over sonar screens and depth charge controls, listening, waiting. Somewhere beneath them, hidden in the dark, was a Soviet submarine. And somewhere inside that submarine, a single man held a key that could trigger a nuclear torpedo powerful enough to destroy an entire American city in one blinding flash. He had not slept, he had not eaten, and he was about to decide whether the United States would survive the day. Back in Washington, the sunlight that streamed through the tall windows of the White House seemed almost offensive in its normalcy. Cars moved along Pennsylvania Avenue. Secretaries carried coffee. Tourists took photographs. Yet inside the Oval Office, the air was thick with dread. President John F. Kennedy sat hunched in his rocking chair, his face pale, his eyes hollow from exhaustion. He knew something most Americans did not. The United States was closer to collapse than at any moment in its history. Not during the Revolution, not during the Civil War, not even during Pearl Harbor. Today was different. Today, civilization itself hung in the balance. But to understand how America came within hours of destruction, you have to begin years earlier, in the smoking ruins of World War II. In 1945, the United States stood alone as the most powerful nation on Earth. Its factories had survived untouched, its cities stood intact, its military possessed a weapon unlike anything in human history, the atomic bomb. The mushroom clouds over Hiroshima and Nagasaki had ended the war and announced a terrifying new era. At first, Americans believed their nuclear monopoly would guarantee safety, but that illusion shattered in 1949 when the Soviet Union tested its own atomic bomb. The news struck Washington like a thunderclap. The Soviets were supposed to be years behind. Instead, they had caught up in 4. Fear spread through the American government. Suddenly, the oceans no longer felt like protection. The United States was vulnerable. The rivalry between the two superpowers hardened into something deeper than competition. It became a struggle for survival, ideology against ideology, capitalism against communism, democracy against dictatorship. And both sides began building more bombs, bigger bombs, hydrogen bombs, weapons so powerful they could erase entire regions. School children practiced duck and cover drills, families built fallout shelters, cities planned evacuation routes that everyone secretly knew would never work. The world lived under a permanent shadow. Then, in 1959, something happened that made Americans even more afraid. Just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, a revolution toppled the Cuban government. A young, fiery revolutionary named Fidel Castro seized power. At first, many Americans didn't pay much attention. Cuba had always been politically unstable, but Castro was different. He aligned himself with the Soviet Union. He embraced communism, and suddenly America had an enemy in its backyard. The idea was almost unbearable. For decades, the United States had seen itself as untouchable, protected by distance. Now, a hostile power sat within easy striking range. Washington panicked. In 1961, the CIA launched a secret invasion using Cuban exiles trained by the United States. The plan was simple: land on Cuban beaches, spark a rebellion, and overthrow Castro. It failed catastrophically. The invasion force was crushed, captured, humiliated. The disaster became known as the Bay of Pigs, and it made Kennedy look weak. Across the ocean, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev watched closely. He drew a dangerous conclusion.
Kennedy, he believed, could be pushed. At the same time, Khrushchev faced his own fears. The United States had placed nuclear missiles in Turkey, right on the Soviet border. From there, American weapons could strike Moscow in minutes. The imbalance terrified him. He wanted leverage, he wanted protection, he wanted to change the game. So he made a secret decision. He would place nuclear missiles in Cuba, missiles capable of reaching Washington, New York, Chicago, most Americans, and he would do it without telling anyone. In the summer of 1962, Soviet ships began crossing the Atlantic. They carried crates, soldiers, and machinery. Under camouflage nets, hidden from curious eyes, were the components of nuclear war. American intelligence noticed the ships, but didn't immediately understand their purpose. That changed on October 14, 1962. High above Cuba, a U-2 spy plane streaked through the sky. Its cameras captured images of something unmistakable. Missile sites, under construction. The photographs landed on Kennedy's desk 2 days later. The room fell silent as his advisors studied them. There was no doubt. The Soviet Union had placed nuclear weapons in Cuba. America was exposed, vulnerable, targeted. Kennedy faced a nightmare choice. If he did nothing, the United States would live under constant threat. If he attacked, he might trigger nuclear war. He later described the weight of the decision. He knew millions could die. He knew America itself might cease to exist. For 7 days, he met secretly with his closest advisors, a group known as XCOM. They argued, they debated. Some demanded immediate airstrikes, others urged diplomacy. The military pushed for invasion. They believed strength would prevent weakness. But Kennedy hesitated. He understood something many generals did not. Once nuclear war began, no one could control it. Finally, he chose a middle path, a naval blockade. American ships would surround Cuba. They would stop Soviet vessels. They would prevent further missiles from arriving, and they would signal American resolve. On October 22nd, Kennedy addressed the nation on television.
Millions watched. They sensed something was wrong. His voice was calm, but grave. He told them the truth. The Soviet Union had placed nuclear missiles in Cuba. The United States would not allow it. The reaction was immediate. Fear. Pure, overwhelming fear. People rushed to grocery stores. They filled gas tanks. They built shelters. They prepared for the end. Some prayed. Some drank. Some simply waited. The blockade began. American ships moved into position. Soviet ships steamed toward them. The world held its breath. If Soviet ships crossed the line, the U.S. Navy would stop them, by force if necessary. For hours, tension mounted. Then, one by one, Soviet ships slowed, stopped, turned around. Relief swept through Washington, but the crisis was not over, because the missiles already in Cuba remained, and the Soviets continued building them. Behind the scenes, messages flew between Kennedy and Khrushchev. Some were calm, some were angry, some were desperate. Time was running out, and then came October 27th, the most dangerous day. That morning, an American U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba. The pilot was killed. In Washington, military leaders urged immediate retaliation. They said America had been attacked. They demanded action. Kennedy knew what retaliation could mean: escalation, war, nuclear war. At the same time, unknown to Washington, events were spiraling out of control beneath the ocean. American ships had detected a Soviet submarine. They began dropping practice depth charges to force it to surface.
Inside the submarine, conditions were unbearable. The air was suffocating. Temperatures soared above 100 degrees. The crew had lost contact with Moscow. They did not know if war had already begun. They believed they were under attack, and they carried a nuclear torpedo. The submarine's captain made a terrifying decision. He ordered the torpedo prepared. He intended to fire. Protocol required agreement from 3 officers. 2 said yes, 1 said no. His name was Vasily Arkhipov. He argued, he insisted, he refused to authorize the launch. He convinced the others to wait. The torpedo was never fired. The submarine surfaced. The world never knew how close it had come. Above, Kennedy faced his own decision. He chose restraint. He responded to Khrushchev's latest message. He offered a deal. The Soviet Union would remove its missiles from Cuba. The United States would promise not to invade. Secretly, America also agreed to remove missiles from Turkey. It was a compromise, a quiet one, but it worked. Khrushchev accepted. The missiles were withdrawn. The crisis ended. America survived. The world survived. But nothing was ever the same. Because for one long, terrible day, the United States had stood on the edge of annihilation, and only a handful of decisions by tired, frightened human beings had kept it from falling into the abyss. And the most terrifying part was this: most Americans never even knew how close they had come. And in the years that followed, as the truth slowly emerged, it became clear that October 27, 1962, was not just the day America almost collapsed, it was the day the world almost ended. And the reasons it nearly happened ran deeper, darker, and further back than anyone had imagined. And the chain of events that led there began long before Kennedy, long before Castro, long before even the atomic bomb, in the quiet, uneasy aftermath of a different war that had left the United States powerful, afraid, and dangerously unprepared for the kind of enemy it was about to face. The strange thing about near catastrophes is how quietly they begin. There is no thunder, no sirens, no sudden sense that the world is about to change forever. Instead, the path to October 27, 1962, began in conference rooms filled with cigarette smoke, in exhausted cities still clearing rubble, and in the minds of men who believed they were preventing disaster, even as they unknowingly made it more likely. In 1945, when World War II ended, the United States emerged with a sense of invincibility it had never known before. Europe lay shattered. Germany was divided. Japan had surrendered. Britain was broke. France was humiliated. Only America stood strong, its economy booming, its military unmatched, its people safe behind 2 vast oceans. But that feeling did not last, because the alliance that had defeated Nazi Germany had always been built on necessity, not trust. The Soviet Union, led by Stalin, had lost more than 20 million people in the war. Entire cities had been wiped off the map, entire generations erased. Stalin was determined that it would never happen again. He did not trust the West. He did not trust America, and he especially did not trust the atomic bomb. At first, the bomb had seemed like a permanent American advantage. The United States possessed a weapon so destructive that no enemy would dare challenge it. American leaders believed it guaranteed peace. But Stalin had spies. Inside the Manhattan Project itself, Soviet agents had stolen secrets. They delivered blueprints, formulas, and designs directly to Moscow. So when the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb in August 1949, the shock in Washington was total. President Harry Truman received the news with grim silence. America was no longer alone.
Now there were two nuclear powers, and each feared the other. What followed was not war, but almost as dangerous: a Cold War, a permanent standoff. Each side built more weapons, each prepared for the worst, each assumed the other might strike first.
In the United States, fear seeped into everyday life. Magazines published diagrams of fallout shelters. Families stocked canned food. Schools taught children to hide under desks, as if wood and steel could stop nuclear fire. But beneath the public fear was something even more dangerous: military planning. American generals began preparing for nuclear war as if it were inevitable. They developed strike plans, target lists, timetables. One plan called for launching thousands of nuclear weapons within hours. It assumed millions would die. It assumed America would survive. Whether that assumption was true, no one knew. Meanwhile, technology accelerated the danger. Bombers were replaced by missiles, missiles that could cross oceans, missiles that could strike in minutes, missiles that could not be recalled. The margin for error disappeared, and errors, everyone knew, were inevitable. Then, in 1957, the Soviet Union shocked the world again. They launched Sputnik. It was only a satellite, a small metal sphere, but its meaning was enormous. If the Soviets could put something into orbit, they could put a nuclear weapon into orbit. They could strike America from space. Panic spread. Americans suddenly felt vulnerable in a way they never had before. The government poured billions into weapons, rockets, and defense systems. But fear cannot be defeated by spending alone. Fear feeds itself. It creates its own logic, its own momentum, its own disasters. That momentum carried forward into the presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower, a war hero who understood the true cost of conflict. He warned of something he called the military-industrial complex, a system that once created would push constantly toward more weapons, more preparation, more readiness for war, even in peace, even without reason, even when the greatest threat was the preparation itself. His warning was largely ignored because fear was easier than restraint, and fear led America step by step toward Cuba. When Fidel Castro took power in 1959, he did not initially declare himself a communist. He spoke of independence, of sovereignty, of resisting foreign control. But America saw danger. For decades, American businesses had dominated Cuba. American tourists had filled its hotels. American money had shaped its economy. Castro threatened all of that. When he nationalized American property, Washington retaliated. Sanctions, isolation, pressure. Castro responded by turning to the only ally willing to help, the Soviet Union. For Soviet leader Khrushchev, Cuba was an opportunity and a risk. He admired Castro's defiance. He saw strategic value in Cuba's location, but he also knew it could provoke America. Still, he believed the risk was worth it. Because the balance of power frightened him. America had more nuclear weapons, more bombers, more missiles, and worst of all, missiles in Turkey, just minutes from Soviet cities. He needed leverage. He needed something to even the odds. Cuba offered that chance. At the same time, John F. Kennedy entered the White House in 1961, facing enormous pressure. He was young, inexperienced, unproven. Many doubted him. Khrushchev doubted him most of all. Their first meeting in Vienna had gone badly. Khrushchev had bullied him, threatened him, tested him. Kennedy left shaken. He later told aides it was the worst experience of his life. Khrushchev concluded Kennedy was weak. That conclusion would shape everything that followed, because weakness invites risk,
and risk invites disaster.
And on that Saturday morning, as Vasily Arkhipov refused to approve the launch of a nuclear torpedo deep beneath the Atlantic, and as John F. Kennedy refused to approve airstrikes in Washington, the fate of the United States and the world rested not on weapons or plans or power, but on restraint, on hesitation, on humanity. And even after the crisis ended, the fear never truly disappeared, because America had learned something it could never forget. Its survival was not guaranteed, its power was not absolute, and its collapse was not impossible. It could happen in a single day, in a single decision, in a single moment of fear. And in the years that followed, America would face other moments, different in form, but frighteningly similar in spirit, when the nation once again drifted toward the brink, when collapse felt possible, when the future hung by a thread no thicker than the judgment of a few fragile human beings. If this journey through history sparked your curiosity, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Tell us which explorer or historical figure you want to uncover next, because the past is packed with bold risks, untold stories, and forgotten paths that quietly reshaped the world we live in today.